You are a child, and your breath fogs the window. Outside, snow falls softly, but inside, your family burns books for warmth. This is not a memory, it's a legacy. A world built on fear, endurance, and silence. But how did the Soviet Union rise? With such brutal hope, and collapse, not with war, but with a whisper? In this immersive journey, you'll walk through frozen streets where children starved in Leningrad stand beside a soldier who carried bullets with trembling hands in Stalingrad, and witness the quiet unraveling. From breadlines in Moscow to a signed paper in a Belovezha forest, ending it all. You'll feel the pride of space triumphs and the heartbreak of a grandmother asking if it was all worth it. This isn't just history, it's memory, dream, and reckoning. A past that still flickers in modern shadows. So lie back, breathe in the cold of forgotten empires, and let the story of the USSR carry you into a sleep full of ghosts and echoes. It's cold, not the kind of cold that bites, it clutches. Your breath fogs in front of your face, mixing with the smoke curling out of shattered windows. You stand in Petrograd 1917, a place that's forgotten the word ordinary. Streets echo with the shouts of Red Guards and the nervous whispers of bureaucrats stuffing documents into sacks. There's no room for sleep here, but still you drift right into the heart of the Soviet myth's first heartbeat. You can smell the iron tang of revolution in the air. People don't walk anymore. They march either toward something hopeful or away from something worse. You hear the clatter of boots on cobblestones as Lenin, bald and intense, steps off a sealed German train and straight into history. It's theatrical, suspiciously so, almost like destiny had a preference for drama. You catch his eyes, cold, focused, as if he's already living 20 years into the future, where statues of him will rise in every town square. He doesn't care that the Winter Palace still has clean dishes from the Tsar's kitchen. He doesn't care that the Soviets are still technically sharing power with a provisional government. He knows something most don't. Power is never shared for long. And just like that, the Bolsheviks make their move. On October 25th, though by Western calendars, it's November 7th, because of course Russia had its own calendar system, because why not? They take the Winter Palace. It's less Les Miserables and more light jog into poorly defended government property. Most of the guards are drunk. The women's battalion valiantly stationed there probably resents being left to defend the last gasps of the old order. But don't let the lack of Hollywood action fool you. This is a tectonic moment. You're watching one of the most influential coups in human history, not with fireworks, but with paperwork and rifles that jam. Lenin declares the birth of a new state, the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It's meant to be temporary. Spoiler alert, it's not. Now try not to blink, because while Petrograd looks like the center of the world right now, it's teetering. The Bolsheviks are radical, sure, but they're also woefully unprepared. They're idealists with pamphlets and pistols, inheriting a country with no functioning economy, a famine creeping in from the countryside, and about 22 political factions, each convinced they alone have the people's mandate. Think Reddit threads with bayonets. The provisional government, bless its naive optimism, had tried to hold democratic elections for a constituent assembly. The Bolsheviks allow the vote, lose badly, and surprise, dissolve the assembly the next day. Why bother with democracy? Lenin shrugs. When history has already decided we're right. It's a chilling logic, and one that echoes through gulags and show trials yet to come. And then there's the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Remember, Russia was still knee-deep in World War I, and the Bolsheviks had promised peace, so they sign a treaty with Germany, so humiliating, so mutilating to Russian land and pride that even some Bolsheviks consider it betrayal. But Lenin insists, we need time. Time to survive. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't gentle either. Meanwhile, opposition brews like a bad stew. The whites monarchists, nationalists, liberals, foreign armies, and basically anyone who hates red flags start pushing back. Civil war looms like a thundercloud, but you're not there yet. For now, you linger in this strange in-between moment. The old world has crumbled, the new one hasn't quite congealed, and you, standing in the snow, watching factory workers wave crimson banners, aren't sure whether to cheer or shiver. Historians still argue whether this revolution was a popular uprising or an elite hijacking. Some say it was inevitable, others say it was a cosmic fluke propelled by Germany's meddling and Russia's exhaustion. What no one argues is this: something irreversible has begun. The sun never really rises in Petrograd this time of year, but the red dawn you're standing under is blinding all the same, and deep down you feel that change isn't coming. It's here, and it's hungry. Now the fires have dimmed, but they haven't gone out. You're still in Russia. Well, technically it's the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, but don't worry, it gets rebranded more times than a Silicon Valley startup. The revolution is won, they say, but the echoing gunshots and starvation don't seem to agree. Welcome to the Russian Civil War. Red versus white, yes, but the only color that stains everything is gray, ash, snow, smoke, and grief. You walk past train cars converted into mobile Bolshevik command centers, painted with propaganda murals, so bold they'd make Times Square blush. Inside, commissars give speeches with wild eyes and louder fists. They speak of the future, of a classless utopia just around the corner. But outside, the only thing people are lining up for is bread that hasn't arrived, and won't. The Civil War isn't civil, nor really a war in the traditional sense. It's a chaos parade. The Red Army, formed by Leon Trotsky, yes, the same Trotsky, who will later be exiled and assassinated with an ice axe, because this story has range, rallies former Tsarist officers and illiterate peasants alike. Their motto, shoot later, ask never. Opposing them, the White Army, a tangled mess of monarchists, nationalists, foreign troops from 14 countries, and even Czechoslovak legions that somehow got lost in the mix. They're united only by their dislike of Bolsheviks, which it turns out isn't enough. Leadership is fractured, goals vary wildly, and morale dips every time another village joins the Reds just to get someone to stop requisitioning their grain. War communism becomes the government's go-to playbook. It sounds like a dystopian parody, but it's terrifyingly real. Nationalize everything. Requisition food by force. Outlaw private trade. If you're a peasant with 2 cows, the state takes one and then accuses you of hoarding. If you complain, you're probably a counter-revolutionary. If you whisper, that's sedition. Whisper quietly enough, and your neighbors might not report you. And oh, the famine. Not just hunger, the kind of absence where you forget what full feels like. Between 1918 and 1921, 5 million people starved to death. Entire villages vanish. Some resort to eating grass, bark, even each other. Historians still debate the causes. Was it policy? Was it chaos? Was it punishment? Whatever it was, it didn't spare children. Outside the cities, anarchists under Nestor Makhno ride black flags and fury through Ukraine. In Central Asia, the Basmachi revolt. In Siberia, Admiral Kolchak dreams of royal restoration while losing railways and sleep. The world watches from afar and sometimes up close. British, American, French and Japanese troops land at various points, mostly to protect their interests, which somehow includes looting vodka distilleries. You duck into a peasant hut outside Kazan. The father tells you, blank-eyed, that last week soldiers came. White? Red? Who knows anymore? And took everything. His children are sleeping under blankets made of potato sacks. He offers you tea that tastes suspiciously like boiled wallpaper. Outside, someone sings a revolutionary hymn with the sadness of a funeral dirge. Amid the collapse, a new policy creeps in. The Cheka, Lenin's secret police. Their job, enforce the revolution. Their method, improvise with brutality. They operate in the shadows, and often in daylight too. If you're accused of being counter-revolutionary, a category so broad it includes anyone with clean shoes, you could disappear. It's not dystopia yet, but you see its scaffolding. And then there's Kronstadt. In 1921, the sailors, those same working-class heroes who'd helped Lenin seize power, rise up demanding more freedom, real Soviets, less tyranny. Their slogan? Soviets without Bolsheviks. For their troubles, they're bombarded into submission. You stand in the ruins of the naval base afterward and wonder if even the revolutionaries can't survive the revolution. What hope does anyone have? Yet somehow, the Bolsheviks win. Not because they're adored, but because they're ruthless, efficient, and because the whites were even worse. When the dust settles, if it ever really does, the Reds are left holding a country in ruins, a population traumatized, and a dream still clinging stubbornly to the walls of smoky meeting halls. It's hard to sleep here, not because of the noise, but because of the silence that follows. You lie in a workers' barracks, surrounded by those who used to believe in something. Some still do. Others have begun to notice that the revolution has teeth, and no one is exempt from the chewing. But tomorrow Lenin will announce a new direction. He'll admit quietly that war communism has failed. A pivot is coming. A strange compromise with capitalism. But that's not tonight. Tonight, the war is ending. The hunger lingers, and the ghosts of a million choices whisper from the walls. And somewhere outside, the snow begins to fall again. Section 3. You wake up to the clinking of coins, a sound you haven't heard in years. Currency, real currency, is back. Bread is no longer something you can only dream about. It's now available for sale, not just seized by men with rifles and red armbands. Welcome to the new economic policy, or NEP, if you're short on syllables and long on exhaustion. The war is over, the famine not quite, but the revolution, ironically, is being put on pause by the very people who started it. Lenin, the ideological juggernaut of 1917, now sounds suspiciously pragmatic. After years of fanatical nationalization and requisitioning, he looks around at the smouldering ruins of his people's hope and says, essentially, maybe let the farmers farm. The NEPI allows limited private trade, small businesses, and some market freedom, but only for the little guys. Factories, banks, and foreign trade, still state-controlled. It's capitalism with communist training wheels. You wander through Moscow's streets and see something bizarre. Life, cafes reopen, peasants bring their surplus to market instead of hiding it under floorboards. There's laughter again, though it's wary, like a prisoner chuckling mid-sentence. The government prints new banknotes that don't immediately dissolve into worthless paper. And yes, there are nepmen, fat-cheeked middlemen, trading goods at a profit, smiling like they've just discovered socialism's off-switch. Everyone pretends not to notice, especially the Bolsheviks, who mutter about this being temporary. But what does temporary mean in a country that's already rewritten time? You overhear two workers joking that the NEP stands for not exactly proletarian. They're not wrong. Inequality blooms like mold in damp wood. While one neighborhood celebrates a meat delivery, another barters candles for dried apples. Lenin knows he's making a deal with the devil, or at least with Adam Smith. But he insists it's necessary, a strategic retreat. He says the economy needs to breathe, like a marathon runner, gulping air after a sprint. Historians still argue whether it was a betrayal or a masterstroke. You don't need to argue. You can see it, clear as the queues outside bakeries that have bread again. And yet the revolution simmers quietly beneath the surface. The Bolsheviks haven't gone soft. They still arrest dissidents. The Checkers rebranded into the GPU, but hasn't lost its appetite for night raids. Censorship becomes more curated, less theatrical than during the war, but more insidious. And the workers' councils, the Soviets that were supposed to rule, reduced to rubber stamps. The party rules now. More accurately, the party rules everything now. You drift through a classroom in Petrograd. Excuse me, it's Leningrad now, because names are easier to change than systems. Children chant revolutionary songs in perfect rhythm, eyes too young to understand the weight of their lyrics. The posters on the walls feature muscular men with enormous smiles lifting hammers that could crush any nuance. But beneath the slogans, you notice something unsettling: discipline. The spark of chaos from 1917 has settled into something sterner, something quieter, something colder, something... Meanwhile, Lenin's health deteriorates. He suffers a stroke, then another. Soon he can barely speak, reduced to scribbling notes that even his allies begin to ignore. You watch him from the corner of a study, lit only by a desk lamp and the flicker of ambition in other men's eyes. His wife worries. His doctors whisper. His comrades circle. Trotsky, brilliant and vain, still believes he's next. But another man waits in the wings, Joseph Stalin. He's not eloquent, he's not flashy, but he's patient, very patient, and he's quietly accumulating power, becoming general secretary, placing loyalists in key posts, shaping the party's structure like clay in cold fingers. He sends Lenin flowers and nurses, all while undermining everything the man stood for. Irony, like everything else here, is state-owned. Lenin, in one of his final lucid moments, pens a testament. He warns that Stalin is dangerous, that his rudeness and concentration of power threaten the revolution. He recommends removing him from leadership. The document vanishes. Party leaders misplace it. They'll rediscover it years later, when it's far too late and Stalin is practically wallpapering the Kremlin with portraits of himself. But you're still here, floating through this strange liminal Russia, not quite capitalist, not fully communist, a country holding its breath, hoping NEP is the answer. You sit beside a market stall in Kharkiv, where a woman sells fried dough and grumbles about taxes, just like her grandmother did before 1917, except now, instead of the Tsar, there's a red star above her head, and instead of the Orthodox Church, there's a new religion, the party. You close your eyes. You try to rest. But in the distance, you hear something shifting. Not loudly, not yet. Just a quiet, methodical reshuffling of power, one paperclip at a time. Lenin is dead, not metaphorically, not politically, literally. January 21st, 19... Pneumonia, strokes, exhaustion, perhaps the weight of his own creation pressing down on his heart. You're standing in Gorky at his deathbed, and for a moment the Soviet Union holds its breath. Then, like clockwork in reverse, the scrambling begins. They embalm him, because of course they do. A country that barely has enough food to keep its people alive spends weeks preserving the man they think gave them life. You join the mourners lining up in the cold, shuffling past his waxy body in what looks suspiciously like a glass coffin from a communist fairy tale. Thousands weep. Some are sincere. Others are simply good at performing sincerity. In Moscow, banners proclaim, "Lenin lived, Lenin lives, Lenin will live." You're not sure whether it's prophecy or threat. Behind the curtain, the real show begins. The power struggle. You drift through the smoky rooms of party congresses, the din of whispered deals and louder denunciations bouncing off the marble walls. Trotsky, the revolutionary rock star, brilliant, confident, too clever for his own good, believes it's his time. He helped build the Red Army, helped win the Civil War, wrote books faster than most people can read. But he has one fatal flaw. He underestimates his opponents, especially one short man with a thick moustache and a quiet, brutal smile. Stalin. He's not the obvious choice. In fact, no one takes him seriously at first. He's seen as boring, bureaucratic, a glorified note-taker, and that's exactly what makes him dangerous. While Trotsky dazzles crowds with speeches, Stalin places loyalists in obscure offices. While the left opposition debates theory, Stalin appoints janitors who owe him their jobs. He builds his power one unnoticed brick at a time. And by the time anyone realizes the house is his, the front door is already locked. The party splits into factions. The left, led by Trotsky, wants to keep the revolution burning, worldwide, perpetual. The right, with Bukharin and others, supports the NEP and a slower pace. Stalin, he zigzags between them like a man changing costumes backstage, always siding with the group that's about to win, always leaving the others behind at just the right moment. By 1927, Trotsky is out, expelled, then exiled. Eventually he'll end up in Mexico, where an ice pick will find its way into his skull, courtesy of Stalin's long-distance grudge. But that's later. For now he writes furious essays about the revolution betrayed while Stalin nods solemnly and continues tightening the screws. And what of the others? Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, once giants of the revolution, now shrink under Stalin's shadow. One by one, they're outmaneuvered, accused, humiliated, and spoiler, eventually executed in show trials, designed more for theatre than truth. But you're not in the spotlight. You're in a small village in the Urals, watching the news trickle in slowly, like melted snow. People don't say Stalin's name with reverence yet, more like curiosity. Who is this man now leading everything? His biography is vague, self-edited, and oddly inspiring. Born in Georgia, son of a cobbler, expelled from seminary, revolutionary turned editor turned commissar. He looks like the kind of man who could disappear in a crowd and then have everyone in that crowd arrested. Historians still argue how much of Stalin's rise was brilliance versus circumstance. Some say he merely filled the void Lenin left behind. Others insist he engineered that void. All you know is that suddenly the revolution has a new face. It's broader, grimmer, less about utopia, more about unity. Less about ideas, more about loyalty, preferably to one man. And something else shifts. The Soviet Union, once imagined as a temporary step in global revolution, starts behaving like an empire, centralized, stratified, draped in red but echoing with old Tsarist habits. The republics, Ukraine, Belarus, the Transcaucasian Federation, are drawn into a union that feels more like submission. Borders become decorative. Moscow rules. Back in the capital, statues of Lenin go up as if to remind people what they've lost or what they should still believe. But the real power doesn't lie with the dead man in the mausoleum. It lives in the Kremlin behind closed doors, where Stalin reads reports late into the night, underlining names, drawing question marks beside factory quotas, and deciding quietly who gets to dream and who doesn't. You watch as the language changes. Comrade replaces citizen. Correct thought replaces opinion. The revolution once promised chaos, energy, liberation. Now it promises order, stability, silence. And as you fall asleep under the hum of a single bare bulb in a state dormitory, you can feel it. The future is no longer a question. It's a plan. And plans here are not to be questioned. The posters are everywhere now. Stalin's face, rendered flatteringly heroic, watches you from train stations, classrooms, even bakery walls, as if he's not just your leader, but your very reflection, your whispering conscience. Children chant his name in school, like it's both lullaby and law. You wonder when exactly the man who wasn't supposed to lead became the only one left capable of leading. But by now, it's too late to ask, and too dangerous. You shuffle through Moscow's snowy streets in the early 1930s, and find a city where nothing seems broken on the surface. There are factories, there are workers, there is pride, engineered, painted, and mandated. The 5-year plans are in full swing. The goals: massive industrialization, electrification, mechanization, also, ideally, not starving everyone. But well, factories rise where swamps used to be. Magnitogorsk springs out of the ground like a Soviet fever dream. Steel, smoke, slogans. The workers live in tents next to furnaces that spit out iron day and night. Productivity posters suggest they're smiling, but you've seen them up close. They're not. You don't smile when your fingers freeze to a wrench, but you don't complain either. Complaining now qualifies as sabotage. Meanwhile, The cult around Stalin blossoms like mold in an airtight room. At first it's subtle, just a quote here, a flattering headline there, but quickly it becomes absurd. He's the great leader, the father of nations, the brilliant genius of humanity, and somehow the best friend of all children. You'd almost laugh if you weren't afraid he could hear it. Historians still argue whether Stalin craved the worship or simply accepted it as useful. You suspect both. Either way, he learns to weaponize it. Every success belongs to him. Every failure, someone else's treachery. It's a neat trick, and one that becomes terrifying when paired with paranoia. Because soon Stalin stops just reshaping the economy. He reshapes reality. Books are rewritten. Photos are edited. Entire people vanish from group portraits. Their smiles removed with ink and their bodies with bullets. You remember Trotsky standing next to Lenin. Not anymore. Now it's just Lenin and a vague suggestion of empty space. And then comes collectivization. The plan is simple. End private farming. Force peasants into collective farms. Mechanize agriculture. Feed the cities. Build socialism. Simple, right? Not even close. You walk through Ukrainian villages as the process unfolds, and what you see is not modernization, it's devastation. Families dragged from homes, grain seized, resistance met with prison or worse. The kulaks, loosely defined as rich peasants, i.e. anyone with a cow, are declared class enemies. Some are shot, most are deported to Siberia, where they contribute to the economy by slowly dying. And then famine. Not just hunger, but death on a scale that haunts the wind. In Ukraine, it becomes the Holodomor. Millions starve. Children lie motionless in fields. Entire towns go silent. The government denies everything. Foreign journalists, if they report honestly, are expelled. Those who cooperate get access and illusions. Was it an act of negligence or a calculated punishment? Historians still fight over this. The archives are full of numbers, but very few names. You pass by a barn where grain rots behind locked doors, while villagers boil weeds. You remember that in this system, food isn't nourishment, it's loyalty. Obedience can be measured in kilograms. And yet, through it all, Stalin grows more popular. His portraits get bigger, his titles get longer. Even as purges begin, quietly at first, people whisper that he's protecting them from enemies. Never mind that those enemies seem to include anyone with a thought or a past. You find yourself in a factory office where a manager stares at his production charts, wondering if falling behind by 2% means treason. You meet a poet who burns his own notebooks just in case. You sit in a tram next to a mother, telling her child gently to never say anything at school about what Papa said at dinner, and the child nods, not scared, just practiced. Because everyone is watching, everyone is listening, and everyone is afraid. But above all, there is pride. That's the strangest part. You still hear laughter, see weddings, feel community. For many, life is better than under the Tsars. There's education, literacy, jobs, even cinema, joyous state-approved cinema where tractors sing and harvests never fail. The Soviet Union is building the future, and if a few eggs need breaking, well, you know the rest. So you lie down in a worker's dormitory, beneath a cracked ceiling and a poster of Stalin offering you bread. You wonder how many people like you lie awake each night, unsure whether they believe the dream or fear the dreamer. And as you drift off, the last sound you hear is a factory whistle echoing into the snow. It's not music, but it's the rhythm of the new world. You wake up in a village that doesn't exist anymore, at least not officially. It's somewhere in Ukraine, or maybe Kazakhstan. Hard to tell, since the signs have been replaced and the maps are aspirational. The air smells of soil and ash. You walk past empty homes, doors swinging in the breeze, fields that should be golden now bare as bone. Welcome to collectivization. Welcome to the famine. This isn't just poor harvests or bureaucratic missteps. This is something colder, something sharper. It begins with quotas. Stalin demands grain for the cities, for export, for prestige. The numbers aren't based on crop yields, they're declarations, like shouting a lie loud enough to make it true. If a village produces less than the quota, clearly it's hiding grain, sabotage, treason, and treason must be punished. So they come, the requisition squads, armed, angry, often drunk. They storm into cottages, overturn beds, poke bayonets into flour sacks, dig up yards in search of imagined hoards. If they find anything, they take it. If they don't, they take more, and always they leave behind nothing but silence. You meet a woman who buried her family's last potatoes beneath a chicken coop. She whispers it like a sin. She doesn't even know you, but still she checks over her shoulder before speaking. The chickens are gone now, eaten, and the potatoes, they were found. She hasn't seen her husband since. This is the Holodomor, death by hunger, though no one calls it that here, not officially. Even years later the word will be disputed, debated, denied. Was it genocide, a policy failure, a tragic necessity? Historians argue with footnotes and fury, but you don't need a textbook, you just need eyes. You see corpses on the roadside, small ones. You see women with bellies bloated not from food but from starvation. You see people eating grass, bark, leather, and in the darkest corners of whisper you hear stories of things that should not be eaten, stories no one survives long enough to repeat twice. And yet trains full of grain still roll out of Ukraine, bound for Moscow, for Germany, for prestige. Stalin insists there is no famine. Foreign journalists are shown model farms where plump pigs snort on cue, and smiling farmers recite scripted praise. Those who report otherwise, like Gareth Jones, find themselves discredited, blacklisted, erased. You drift through a town meeting where officials accuse a 12-year-old boy of hoarding. His crime? Picking a handful of wheat heads from the ground. He's sentenced to 10 years. The adults nod. They have to. Justice isn't about guilt. It's about quotas, too. The sheer scale of it dulls the senses. Over 4 million dead in Ukraine alone, by some counts. More in the Caucasus, Kazakhstan, other regions. No monuments, no mourning, just vanished people and flourishing lies. Even decades later, the silence will linger like a fog in the national memory. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the press runs cheerful headlines. Record harvest achieved. Collective farming, the future. Stalin praises the results, not the methods. The peasants, he insists, are being modernized, educated, liberated from backwardness. If they resist, well, that's just class war. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the deportations, entire nationalities labelled unreliable. Poles, Volga Germans, Koreans, Tatars, all packed into trains and scattered across Siberia, Central Asia, the Arctic. Some never make it, some never return. You visit one of the settlements, mud huts, frozen ground, skeletal hands digging for firewood. A child hands you a shoe that isn't hers. She hasn't seen her parents in months. You might wonder, where's the resistance? There is some. Quiet, fatal. A farmer's wife who poisons herself and her children rather than starve. A collective that burns its crops before the requisition squads arrive. But most simply endure or die. And here's the strangest thing. Stalin's popularity rises. He frames the famine not as failure, but triumph, proof of the state's strength. The kulaks, the enemies, the saboteurs, they're being eliminated. The country is being purified, reforged. A generation later, many will speak of these years with grim nostalgia, not because they were good, but because they were clear. You finally stumble into a city. It feels like another world. There's food here, if not plenty. The theatres still perform. The children still recite. And every wall bears a face. His face, Stalin, watching, not kindly, not cruelly, just inevitably. You lie down in a worker's dormitory, head full of dust and doctrine. Outside, the wind howls through the alleyways, like it's trying to scream for those who can't. And as you fall asleep, one quiet thought hums beneath your breath like a lullaby. If this is the cost of progress, what was the price of failure? The purges don't begin with a bang. They begin with a whisper, a name left off a list, a comrade who stops answering the door, a photograph mysteriously missing a face. And you don't ask why, of course. You just straighten your jacket, face forward, and repeat what you've been told. There are enemies among us, enemies within. It's 1936, and you're attending a trial. The charges are treason, conspiracy, espionage. The accused, former Bolsheviks, old revolutionaries. Men who once stood beside Lenin, who built this world you now inhabit. Today, they confess, publicly, tearfully, and with scripts as carefully curated as a theatre play. They admit to things no sane person believes, collaborating with Trotsky, sabotaging dams, planning to kill Stalin with a poisoned balloon. It would almost be funny if it weren't followed by the sound of boots and bullets. You're watching the Great Purge unfold, not just a removal of enemies, but an unmaking of history. It's not enough for Stalin to be in charge. He must be right. He must have always been right. And everyone who ever doubted him, they must never have existed. This is the age of paranoia, wearing a uniform. You see it in people's eyes, wide, frantic, constantly scanning. No one knows what makes you a target. Is it something you said, something your cousin said, a letter you received, or worse, didn't receive? Historians still debate the psychology of it all. Was Stalin simply consolidating power, paranoid beyond reason? Was the entire Soviet system so unstable that it required perpetual purging to function? You don't have the luxury of theory. You have the reality of living in a city where half the apartments have new tenants every month, and no one ever talks about the old ones. You walk past Lubyanka prison in Moscow. It's just another building if you squint. But at night the lights never go out, and if you stand close enough, you can hear the trains underneath rumbling into silence. The NKVD, the new name for the secret police, works efficiently. Interrogation becomes industrial, torture procedural, confessions routine. Some confess because they're broken, others because they hope it'll save their families, most because, well, they know resistance is pointless. You can't argue with the script if someone's already chosen your ending. You know someone. You always do. A friend, a professor, a cousin. First they're arrested, then they confess, then they're gone. You stop mentioning them. You stop remembering them. Eventually, you wonder if you imagined them in the first place. But it's not just the political elite. It's everyone. Teachers, poets, factory workers, generals. The military suffers especially. Stalin's afraid of his own army, so he cuts it down. Marshal Tukhachevsky, brilliant young, decorated, disappears into a show trial and then into the earth. Thousands follow. You wonder how the country will defend itself without leadership. But that's not Stalin's concern. Loyalty first, victory later. And still, people believe. That's the hardest part to grasp. They cheer at the trials. They write letters to the newspapers praising Stalin's vigilance. Children turn in their parents. Wives denounce their husbands. And yes, some are true believers. Others simply believe. That belief is safer than doubt. You attend a lecture where a student stands up and asks, "If all these enemies were here the whole time, why did we succeed in the revolution?" The professor pauses, then replies, "We succeeded despite them, thanks to Stalin." Everyone nods. The student is gone the next day. And yet culture thrives, at least on the surface. There are films, plays, poems, all filtered through the lens of socialist realism, where heroes are flawless and tractors solve everything. You sit in a theatre watching a musical about steel workers who smile more than most humans physically can. It's oddly catchy. It's also deeply terrifying. You return to your apartment and find a new neighbor. She doesn't say much. No one does. You both drink weak tea in silence, listening to the hallway for footsteps, not because you expect them, but because, by now, it's a reflex. And just when it seems like the storm might end, it grows teeth. The purges extend to the countryside, to nationalities. Poles, Germans, Latvians, Koreans, entire communities vanish into special operations. They're accused of being foreign spies, of planning sabotage, their crime being born in the wrong place. Sometimes the crime is simply existing. By 1938, the machinery begins to creak. It's not guilt that slows it down, it's exhaustion. Even Stalin, perhaps, realizes the math no longer adds up. There are more enemies in prison than outside. The bureaucracy struggles to keep track. The quotas for executions become awkward. So the gears slow, not stop. Never stop, but slow. And in their place, a new Stalin emerges. Father of the nation, benevolent, wise, misunderstood. The purges weren't his fault, he suggests. Excesses, overzealous officials. He too was a victim. It's a masterclass in historical erasure. You lie in bed with a newspaper under your pillow, afraid someone might find the crossword incomplete and assume you're illiterate, lazy, or ideologically suspect. Paranoia has become routine. You don't even notice it anymore. It's just the way air feels. And outside, in the night, the posters still smile. Stalin still smiles. And everyone else tries very, very hard to do the same. There's a knock, not on your door on the continent. A thunderous, booted knock that breaks glass and history at the same time. June 27th, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Hitler invades the Soviet Union, violating the non-aggression pact signed just 2 years earlier with the casual arrogance of a man flipping a board game. You wake to air raid sirens and disbelief. Stalin, for the first time in his rule, is speechless. You're in Kiev, or maybe Minsk, or maybe some nameless village, with a factory, a school, and now a smouldering crater. The German blitzkrieg crashes through Soviet defenses like a hammer through wet cardboard. Entire armies vanish. Towns fall before the ink has dried on the reports. The Red Army, purged, paranoid, undertrained, scrambles to react. And you run. In the beginning, Stalin disappears. Not metaphorically, he literally vanishes for several days. Locked inside his dacha, possibly stunned, possibly panicking, possibly calculating. Historians still wonder, did he expect it? Was he betrayed by his own hubris? Regardless, when he re-emerges, he speaks not as a god, but as a man. He calls his people comrades. He asks for their help. He invokes the great Russian people. A subtle shift, the Marxist veneer peels back, revealing an older, deeper nationalism. You're not just fighting for the revolution now, you're fighting for the motherland. And fight they do. The war is unlike anything you've seen. It isn't clean. It isn't noble. It's brutal, personal, apocalyptic. Entire cities are starved into submission. Villages are erased. Civilians become combatants. Children carry rifles. And behind every front line, another war rages. Political officers monitor loyalty. Snipers settle vendettas. And the NKVD ensures that fear is always part of the rations. You ride in a train full of evacuees, crushed between grandmothers clutching icons and engineers clutching blueprints. Factories are dismantled, hauled east, and reassembled near the Urals, where workers labor beneath slogans urging them to produce as if lives depended on it, because they do. Even the propaganda now feels honest. Everyone is terrified, and everyone is trying. In the west, the Germans lay siege to Leningrad. For 872 days, the city starves. You trudge through frozen streets, littered with the dead and hear symphonies played by skeleton orchestras. Bread is baked with sawdust, rats become delicacies, and still the people do not surrender. In occupied zones, the Nazis unleash horrors beyond comprehension. Entire Jewish populations are rounded up and exterminated. The SS carries out mass executions in forests and ravines. Soviet POWs die by the millions in camps that redefine cruelty. You don't get used to it, you just stop reacting, because there's no time to grieve when the front line moves faster than news. And yet, something shifts. The Red Army adapts, learns, reinvents itself. The T-34 tank rolls off assembly lines like steel thunder. New generals rise, Zhukov, Vasilevsky, commanders with grit and little patience for slogans. The Soviet war machine becomes exactly that, a machine, massive, grinding, unstoppable. Then comes Stalingrad. The city named after Stalin becomes the crucible of the entire war. You arrive just in time to feel the absurdity. The city is rubble before the fighting even starts. Buildings become bunkers, basements become front lines. Soldiers fight room by room, floor by floor, in a dance of death so intimate it resembles a knife fight in a phone booth. You hold your breath as Paulus's Sixth Army gets encircled, an entire German army trapped like a wasp in a glass jar. They freeze, they starve, they surrender. It's not just a victory, it's the victory. The first time the tide truly turns. For the first time you believe not in ideology but in survival. The USSR can win, and it will, but at a price. You visit Kursk, where the largest tank battle in history leaves fields littered with twisted metal. You enter Berlin with Soviet troops in 1945, stepping over Nazi graffiti and into a city that looks like the inside of a broken television. The red banner is raised over the Reichstag. Hitler is dead. Germany is broken. And suddenly, the Soviet Union is not just alive, it's a superpower. Back home, Stalin walks among the ruins, like a sculptor admiring a shattered statue. He's won the war. He saved the Union. So says every newspaper, every child's textbook, every painting, in every government building. He is father, general, genius, the great redeemer. You try to sleep that night, cradled not by peace, but by exhaustion. Victory has arrived, but it hasn't brought warmth. Just silence, just rubble, just a lingering question. Now that the world is no longer ending, what kind of world have we saved? Stalingrad never really leaves you. Not the name, not the stench, not the sound of boots crunching over bones that haven't been buried yet. The Red Army wins, yes. The Germans surrender, but nothing about it feels like triumph. It feels like survival, dragged out over a winter, so cruel even time shivers. And yet this frozen ruin becomes sacred, a turning point, a symbol, a warning, a myth in the making. You walk through the wreckage. It's not a city anymore. It's a charred monument to stubbornness. Apartments collapsed like tired lungs. Water pipes frozen mid-burst. Rats scurrying past medals, still pinned to corpses. Every wall is scarred with bullet holes, and slogans written in charcoal. Not one step back, the order given under Stalin's direct decree. Simple, unyielding. If you retreat, you're shot. If you advance, you might live. And if you die, well, you'll be buried in the place your boots last stood. Maybe. You sit with a soldier drinking melted snow and eating horse meat. He lost 3 fingers. He's 19. He jokes that, at least now, he can't be conscripted again. His laugh sounds like gravel. You don't ask his name. No one does anymore. It's easier that way. Historians still debate why the Soviets held Stalingrad. Was it logistics, geography, sheer spite? Whatever the reason, the city becomes a sacred word. It didn't just stop the Germans, it recalibrated the entire war. For the Nazis, it was the beginning of the end. For the Soviets, it was the end of the beginning. Zhukov, the general who orchestrated the counter-offensive, becomes a hero, but carefully, Stalin doesn't like competition. Too much applause in someone else's direction makes him uncomfortable. You see it in how quickly Zhukov gets shuffled away after the war. Promotions with a side of exile. After Stalingrad, the Red Army doesn't stop. It pushes west like a glacier on fire. Kursk follows, a battle so large, so metallic, that the earth itself feels concussed. Then Ukraine, then Poland, and eventually Berlin. But Stalingrad remains the ghost that haunts them all, the moment they realize they could bleed the beast. You wander into a war museum being built amid the rubble. The guides speak in hushed awe, not just about tactics, but about sacrifice. They display rifles made from scrap metal, letters written on leaves, uniforms sewn from curtains. The exhibits don't flinch, they sanctify, and in the background Stalin's portrait hangs over everything, not as a commander, but as a prophet who saw this future coming all along, allegedly. But you remember things differently. You remember how the war began, with denial, how Stalin refused to believe Hitler would betray the pact, how officers were shot for preparing defences, how entire fronts collapsed under the weight of indecision. You remember fear, not foresight. And yet, the myth is stronger than memory. Children are taught that Stalin guided the nation with iron will, that the people rallied behind him like one fist, that unity and socialism defeated fascism. You don't argue, you nod, you memorize the approved version, you practice repeating it with feeling. Stalingrad becomes a film, a poem, a painting, a pilgrimage. Veterans cry when they speak of it, but not just from pride, often from the unbearable tension of remembering without permission. You meet a woman who carried ammunition in buckets, while German shells shattered the walls around her. Her medals are heavy, her voice is not. You try to sleep in a rebuilt dormitory near the Volga. The walls are new, but the bones beneath them are old. Outside, children play war. They scream for the motherland as they throw sticks. No one corrects them. That's how they learn. That's how we all learn now. And just when you think you've made peace with this chapter, you see a soldier carve a name into a wall that's already been painted over twice. It's not his name, it's a friend's, one who didn't make it, one who deserves to be remembered by something other than numbers in a report. Because in a war this large, this terrible, this transformative, the greatest loss isn't lives, it's the truth. And the truth, like so many other things here, has already been assigned a new version. You arrive back in Moscow in 1945, expecting celebration, balloons, kisses, champagne, and yes, there are parades. There are flags, fireworks, songs sung through hoarse, smiling throats. But beneath the applause, something else stirs: exhaustion, suspicion, the silence of those who've returned from a war, only to find that peace is not the opposite of war, it's just another front. The city is intact, mostly. The buildings stand straighter than the people. You pass veterans with missing limbs, who receive medals, but can't get bread. You pass widows told that sacrifice is glorious, even if no one sent flowers. And you pass prisoners, yes, prisoners, returning from German camps, not to welcome, but to interrogation. After all, surviving captivity might suggest collaboration, and collaboration smells like treason. So naturally, the NKVD gets involved. Historians still argue whether post-war Stalinism was a continuation of wartime paranoia or a return to its pre-war roots. Either way, you see it everywhere. Factories work overtime, not just to rebuild, but to overachieve. Cities are reconstructed by hand, brick by loyal brick, and in the background, Stalin's moustache looms larger than ever, on posters, on medals, and in people's dreams. You tour a reconstruction project in Stalingrad. What used to be ash and ghosts is now concrete and slogans. Workers chant verses as they lay foundations. The city is reborn, but not healed. Healing requires time, and time here is spent on quotas. Back in Moscow, you sense the shift in rhetoric. No longer is it the proletarian revolution, it's the great patriotic war. The language hardens. The victories swell. Soviet science is lauded. Soviet culture is unparalleled. Soviet losses, they shrink in the official version. The dead become statistics. The survivors become symbols. And the survivors, well, they're watched. You meet a writer whose book about the war gets pulled for being too tragic. Another's memoir is shelved for ideological confusion. Everyone's stories are filtered through a lens that turns grief into glory. You listen to a returned soldier say in a whisper that he feels lonelier now than in the trenches. But his medals say otherwise. His children recite slogans, so he smiles. What else can he do? The camps don't empty. In fact, the Gulag system expands. New roads, new railways, built by prisoners who are taught that labor is redemptive. You visit a camp where one man's crime was unauthorized contact with foreigners. The foreigner was his uncle. The uncle was a postcard. The irony, of course, is that Stalin himself now walks the global stage as a respected ally, at least for the moment. At Yalta he poses with Churchill and Roosevelt like their old drinking buddies. The West fawns over Uncle Joe, oblivious to the blood under his fingernails. You're tempted to laugh, but you remember that jokes, even quiet ones, can earn you 10 years. A new phrase enters the Soviet vocabulary, zastoy, stagnation. Not in economy yet, but in spirit. There is a script now, a way to behave, a ladder to climb, provided you don't look down or ask too many questions. The war is over, but the surveillance state remains, because trust, once broken, is never reissued, only managed. But even under this weight, people find ways to breathe. They marry, they dance, they read though carefully. Jazz clubs pop up like mushrooms after rain, technically banned, but tolerated as long as the volume stays low. You sit in a smoky cellar where a saxophone winds its way through heartbreak and hope, and for a moment you forget the posters on the wall. Then the lights flicker, just enough to remind you where you are. You visit a rural village, rebuilt with repurposed war scrap, a tractor made from tank parts, a school with windows once designed for bunkers. The children draw pictures of Stalin and write poems about steel production. Their parents talk about cousins who never came home, but they talk in code, using phrases like, "He stayed in Germany," or "He works far north now." Everyone understands. No one explains. The cities swell, the countryside withers. Urban life becomes the symbol of progress. Peasants move to towns, trade horse carts for factory jobs, and are told this is ascension, but their eyes say otherwise. They miss the silence of fields, the unrecorded conversations, the ability to say maybe instead of always yes. You fall asleep in a communal apartment where 7 families share a kitchen. There's a child singing lullabies in the next room, and a kettle boiling somewhere distant. Through the window you see stars, but they feel state-approved somehow. Beautiful, yes, but watched, like everything. And just as you drift into sleep, you remember, peace here doesn't feel like rest. It feels like waiting. You wake to headlines that feel suspiciously excited. The great leader is ill. Then the great leader is recovering. Then silence. And finally, on March 5th, 1953, a phrase that doesn't feel quite real. Stalin is dead. Dead? For a man who seemed eternal, carved from marble and paranoia, death comes absurdly mundane. He collapses on the floor of his dacha, found hours later, soaked in his own fear and silence. No one dared enter without orders, and now there will be none. You stand in a sea of mourners in Red Square, the crowd packed so tightly it crushes people to death, literally a stampede for a corpse. Because say what you will about Stalin, fear works, myth works, millions weep, some sincerely, some because that's what's expected, others because they've never known anything else. You're not sure why you cry. Maybe relief, maybe confusion, maybe because after decades of tyranny, No one taught you how to feel anything else. Inside the Kremlin, the vultures circle. Beria, head of the secret police, moves fast. Too fast. He smiles too much. Gives too many speeches about reform. Promises to dismantle the terror machine he helped build. Historians still debate whether he meant it. Doesn't matter. By year's end he's executed, shot in a basement, for trying to grab the steering wheel before the car even restarted, which leaves a strange cast of survivors. Malenkov, Molotov, Kaganovich. But one man stands quiet, unremarkable, until suddenly he doesn't. Nikita Khrushchev. You wouldn't have bet on him. He looks like someone's affable uncle, speaks plainly, jokes too much, but he's shrewd and he knows how to wait. He sidesteps rivals like a man dodging puddles. And then, in 1956, he does the unthinkable. He talks. You're in a crowded party congress when it happens. A closed session, they call it, but words travel faster than orders. Khrushchev delivers the secret speech, and nothing about it is quiet. He denounces Stalin, names the purges, the betrayals, the terror. He calls it a cult of personality, says the revolution was hijacked, that comrades were killed for nothing. The hall doesn't erupt, it freezes. People sit still, like they're afraid movement might make the truth louder. Some weep, some faint. One delegate has a heart attack. You sit there stunned, realizing that you've just watched the Soviet Union blink just once, but long enough to crack the marble. Outside, things shift, cautiously. The gulags begin to empty, not all at once, not loudly, but steadily. Prisoners once deemed enemies of the people are quietly released. Rehabilitation becomes a bureaucratic phrase, stamped in red ink. Families receive letters, sometimes bodies, and always apologies that arrive too late to be believed. The arts stir. A novel circulates. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. It dares to describe the Gulag. It's published, officially. You read it with trembling hands, halfway expecting the police to knock. But no one does. Not this time. And then the world outside notices. Khrushchev tours the US in 1959, waving, smiling, eating hot dogs in Iowa like some baffled extraterrestrial. He pounds his shoe at the UN. Yes, but he also makes clear this is a new USSR, still powerful, still rigid, but no longer ruled by fear alone. Of course, it's not all thaw. In 1956, Hungary tries to reform too fast, talks of leaving the Warsaw Pact. The tanks roll in, the protests are crushed. You see students shot in the streets. So much for spring. And at home, Khrushchev pushes forward industrial reform, agricultural schemes, the Virgin Lands campaign, trying to coax wheat from Kazakhstan's dust. It works for a while, then fails loudly. Bureaucracy blooms like algae in stagnant water, promises outpace results. But the most symbolic shift. Stalin's body is moved. Once entombed in Lenin's mausoleum, it's now reburied discreetly near the Kremlin wall. No ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet subtraction. You visit the site. There's a small plaque, nothing more. The man who ruled everything now reduced to marble and footnotes. And yet his shadow lingers. You sit in a kitchen where friends debate whether the secret speech was sincere. Was Khrushchev brave, or just cleaning house? Is this thaw permanent or tactical? Someone lights a cigarette and mutters, "You don't melt a glacier with a match." But there is warmth, even if cautious. People talk a bit louder. Books get passed hand to hand. Films dare to show sadness. You even hear jazz on the radio. Not banned jazz, actual state-approved jazz. The sound of a door creaking open. You fall asleep in a Moscow apartment where the heat works sometimes and the walls are thinner than secrets. And just as your eyes close, you hear a neighbor laugh, a real unsupervised laugh, and you wonder if this is what freedom feels like, or if it's just the echo of something better trying to be born. You wake in a wheat field, or what was supposed to be a wheat field. It's dusty, dry, and cracked like old Soviet porcelain. Welcome to the Virgin Lands, Khrushchev's great agricultural dream, now mostly a cautionary tale told by tired farmers and bitter tractors. The campaign had promised bounty, millions of hectares of unused land in Kazakhstan, Siberia, and beyond, suddenly made fertile. It was a pitch only a man with a flair for theatre could make. Take young people, give them ploughs, inspire them with songs, and boom, feed the USSR forever. At first it worked, sort of. The first harvests were decent, but no one thought long-term. Soil isn't ideology, it gets tired. You kneel, run your hands through the earth, its powder, it blows away with the wind. Erosion, drought, and poor planning turn optimism into dust storms. But in Moscow, Khrushchev still gives speeches, still waves his hands, still talks about corn, so much corn. You remember the corn obsession. Fields of it sprouting where it had no business growing. Corn on posters, in textbooks, in jokes whispered carefully. They called him Kukuruznik, the corn man. He dreamed of catching up to America's milk and meat production. He'd seen Iowa and come back with fantasies. Instead, cows in the USSR go hungry on a diet designed for Hollywood cattle with personal trainers. But Khrushchev doesn't just dream about farming. He dreams about everything. The space race begins. First satellite, Sputnik. First dog in orbit, Laika. First man in space, Yuri Gagarin, whose grin becomes more iconic than any flag. You watch his launch on a flickering television, surrounded by neighbors holding their breath. And when he returns alive, it's not just a victory, it's proof that Soviet science can win, that the heavens can be read. The country glows with pride, but it also shakes with contradictions. The kitchen debates between Nixon and Khrushchev, a weird dance of refrigerators and ideology. Soviet citizens see glimpses of the West, jeans, chewing gum, pop music, all filtered, all suspect, but there. And once a dream enters the room, you can't shove it back out. At home, the cracks widen. The economy, though stable, lurches. Consumer goods are always late or wrong. 1 year, the shoe factories overproduce left boots. Another, the television tubes explode if left on too long. It's not collapse. It's a kind of absurd ballet, where everyone dances off rhythm, but pretends it's the plan. You visit a factory in Yekaterinburg, where workers joke that their machines are older than the Soviet Union itself. They say it quietly, of course. The KGB hasn't vanished, it's just better dressed now. Less torture, more paperwork. Still, fear lingers in light bulb flickers and overcooked apologies. Then there's the Berlin Wall, built in 1961, almost overnight. You're there the day it goes up. Bricks laid between childhood friends and family members. The line between East and West becomes literal, concrete, barbed, final. The Soviets claim it's protection from fascists. Everyone else knows it's a cage. And yet Khrushchev keeps talking, loudly, emotionally, slamming shoes at the UN, barking about capitalism's decay. His charisma is undeniable. He's the only Soviet leader who seems like he actually enjoys the job, but charisma can't fix food shortages or ideological fatigue, and slowly even his supporters grow tired of the noise. The Cuban Missile Crisis arrives like a hangover after too many promises. Missiles in Cuba, blockades, a standoff with the United States that brings the world inches from oblivion. You sit in a bunker during those days, listening to the radio twitch between bravado and silence. Then, suddenly, deal. The missiles are withdrawn. War is avoided. But the cost? Perception. Khrushchev looks weak, reckless, alone. By 1964, his colleagues have had enough. A quiet coup, no bullets, just a resignation letter and a retirement in the countryside, officially blamed on old age and health. He fades from power, with no statue torn down, no parade, no trial, just silence, and a garden where he tends to corn that still refuses to grow. Brezhnev takes over not with thunder, but with a yawn. You sleep that night in a Khrushchevka, a prefabricated apartment block, small but warm. Designed during his era, they rise across the Union like mushrooms. Not elegant, but practical. You stare at the ceiling tiles and wonder if the dreams Khrushchev sold were real or just very well rehearsed. Because for all his flaws, for all the corn and chaos, he did try to thaw the frost. And now that he's gone, the air's growing colder again. Leonid Brezhnev doesn't walk into power. He settles into it, like someone sinking into an old armchair, gently, gradually, with a grunt of satisfaction and no intention of getting up any time soon. You meet him not through drama or revolution, but through routine. Everything under Brezhnev will be a little softer, a little slower, and a lot more predictable, until, of course, it isn't. It's the mid-1960s. You stroll through Moscow and notice something strange. Stability after decades of upheaval. Revolutions, famines, purges, wars. Things finally stop spinning, but instead of relief, it feels like sedation. The slogans are still there, but the voices that shout them are tired. The party keeps marching, but no one's sure if the path leads forward or just in circles. Brezhnev doesn't make speeches that ignite hearts. He doesn't build cults of personality the way Stalin did, but he still ensures his face appears in every classroom, every office, every slightly too quiet hallway. His eyebrows alone become national icons, thick, immovable, defiant, like two woolly borders on the map of his face. He brings mature socialism, they say, whatever that means. Factories still hum, people still work, but everything feels stuck. The economy is a planned loop. Overpromise, underdeliver, adjust the statistics. You visit a shoe factory that produces 10,000 left boots in a month and considers it a success. Why? Because that's what the plan required. Historians later call this period zastoy, stagnation, but at the time it just feels like routine. Life isn't great, but it's survivable. You line up for meat, wait months for a car, watch black and white television where news anchors look as tired as you feel. You raise your children not with dreams, but with advice. Keep your head down, say the right things, don't ask why. And yet, Brezhnev brings a kind of pride too. The USSR is at its geopolitical peak, a superpower. Rivals with the United States, allies across the globe. You read about Soviet influence in Angola, Vietnam, Afghanistan, countries you couldn't place on a map, now painted red in school books. The arms race continues. So does the space race, though the novelty has faded. There's a new Olympic team, new uniforms, a new generation that believes, not because they're told to, but because they don't remember reasons not to. And then, Prague. Czechoslovakia dares to flirt with liberalization, socialism with a human face, they call it. And for a moment, it works. Newspapers print real opinions. People debate, laugh, dream. You go to Prague that summer and feel something rare in the Eastern Bloc, joy. Then, on August 20, tanks roll in. Soviet tanks, over 200,000 troops. It's called a brotherly intervention, which is exactly the sort of thing abusive siblings say right before breaking your arm. Brezhnev himself doesn't blink. The Brezhnev doctrine is born. Any threat to socialism anywhere is a threat to socialism everywhere. You watch students carry flowers to tanks, and tanks respond with threats. The joy dies. The press tightens. The dream cracks. Back home, people get the message. Reform is dangerous. Idealism is punished. Better to let the system drift, unchallenged, than try to make it breathe. The 1970s bring détente with the West arms control, treaties, polite photo ops. But inside, the Soviet system hardens. Bureaucracy metastasizes. You meet a man who works for the Ministry of Light Industry. His job, filling out forms that verify other forms have been filled. He has a window office. Corruption becomes institutionalized. Not flashy corruption, no sports cars or mansions, just quiet perks, a better apartment, imported coffee, access to a store where the shelves aren't empty. The black market isn't underground anymore, it's standing right behind the commissar with a wink. But even amidst decay, people adapt. They build lives. Marry, read, joke quietly. You hear one in line at a grocery store. They pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. Everyone laughs, softly. Culture survives. You go to the cinema and see Tarkovsky's Stalker, a slow, hypnotic film that somehow escapes the censors. Poets publish verses so dense with metaphor, you need a shovel to dig through the meaning. Music evolves. There's Soviet rock now, though officially it doesn't exist. Then Brezhnev starts fading, not politically. His power remains unchallenged, but physically, his speech slurs. His eyes drift. He's kept upright by protocol and pharmaceuticals. You watch him on TV, barely coherent, still applauded, still revered. By 1980, he's awarded his 10th Order of Lenin. 10. You suspect even he's lost count. The country applauds out of habit, or inertia, or fear of what happens when this old man finally stops breathing. You sleep that night in a Leningrad apartment, beside a half-broken radio, playing the state anthem. The wallpaper peels, the sink leaks, but the children in the next room sleep soundly, dreaming of space, sports, or nothing at all. Because for now, the Union still stands. Not strong, not noble, but immovable, like Brezhnev himself, propped up, embalmed in ritual, still gripping the wheel as the car drifts slowly toward a cliff. When Brezhnev finally dies in 1982, you don't cry, no one really does. There's a state funeral, of course, marching soldiers, weeping news anchors, floral arrangements, the size of small buses, but the public reaction feels performative, polite, like clapping at the end of a very long, very boring opera. He ruled for 18 years, and yet you struggle to remember anything specific. It's not that he did nothing, it's that everything he did dissolved into a kind of national yawn, stability without growth, order without hope. His era wasn't violent like Stalin's, or volatile like Khrushchev's. It was quiet, decaying, sedated. And now? Now begins the comedy of succession. First up, Yuri Andropov, former KGB chief, a man who smells like secrets and cough medicine. You expect him to be terrifying, but he's tired, smart, yes, cynical, definitely. He tries to tighten discipline, anti-corruption drives, labor crackdowns, vague reform whispers, but he's already dying, kidney failure, less than 15 months on the throne, and he spends most of it horizontal. Then comes Konstantin Chernenko. If Andropov was a whisper, Chernenko is a sigh. Old, frail, visibly uncomfortable in his own skin. He ascends mostly because no one else wants to rock the boat. You watch him read speeches with eyes glazed, mouth trembling, words written by someone else. He rules for 13 months, dies in his sleep. The Soviet Union has officially entered its weekend at Bernie's phase. The joke around town. The line for the leadership is shorter than the line for sausages. And then, finally, someone different. March 1985. A name not often spoken until now. Mikhail Gorbachev. You don't know what to make of him at first. He's young, relatively charismatic. He speaks without reading, smiles without wincing. More unsettlingly, he seems sincere. You're skeptical. Everyone is, because hope is expensive, and the people here have learned to rent their expectations, not buy. But Gorbachev starts moving fast. Too fast, maybe. He introduces glasnost, openness. Suddenly, newspapers report actual problems. Journalists ask real questions. Archives begin to creak open. Stalin's crimes are acknowledged publicly. The Gulag becomes more than rumor. People gasp. Some faint. One historian calls it truth by hemorrhage. You call it confusing. Because while part of you cheers, part of you winces. What do you do with truth after decades of lies? It doesn't heal, it unsettles. It's like shining a flashlight into a room where you've been pretending the dust was snow. Then comes perestroika, restructuring, economic reform, limited private enterprise, cooperatives, incentives. You visit a newly opened cafe and realize it's privately owned. The food's terrible, the service is worse, but people are smiling because it's theirs, not the state's. The dream is small, but it's breathing. Gorbachev walks a tightrope between ideology and necessity. He wants to preserve socialism, but fix its flaws. It's like trying to upgrade an airplane mid-flight while flying blind over a volcano during a thunderstorm. And naturally, the conservatives hate it. So do the radicals. The people caught in the middle, everyone else. You visit a steel plant in the Urals, where the manager complains that reforms just mean confusion. The workers don't understand the new system. The old quotas are gone, but the new incentives are vague. The result? Steel production drops. So does morale. Then there's nationalism, latent for decades, now erupting like dormant volcanoes. Estonia starts whispering about independence. Then Latvia, Lithuania. The Caucasus stirs. Ukraine watches closely. The old empire, once frozen in unity, now fractures along ethnic, linguistic, cultural lines. Not violently, not yet, but the tension is thick enough to chew. And through it all, Gorbachev keeps smiling, speaking, traveling. He's a media darling in the West, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. Americans swoon over his charm. Meanwhile, in the USSR, shelves are empty, wages stagnant, and the ruble more theoretical than useful. You stand in line for butter and hear someone mutter, "He's more popular in Washington than in Moscow." The arms race cools. Treaties are signed. Nuclear arsenals reduced. You exhale with the world. But at home, that peace doesn't fill stomachs or heat apartments. The state loosens its grip, and suddenly, no one seems to be steering. A Soviet television show airs a satire about bureaucrats, and the censors approve it. People laugh, but nervously, like they're not sure if they're allowed. But that's the new normal now. Ambiguity wrapped in potential. You go to a poetry reading in Leningrad. The poet reads verses once banned, now embraced. He says the word freedom 3 times. No one knocks on the door. You clap, quietly, just in case. And in that moment, the Union feels like a man learning to walk again, limping, wobbling, sometimes falling, but undeniably moving. No one's sure where to or how far. But tonight, you sleep in a country that's beginning to remember it once had a voice. And now, it's beginning to speak again. The voice gets louder and stranger and more fragmented, because once people remember how to speak, they start saying everything at once. All the thoughts bottled for decades now explode across newspapers, protests, dinner tables. You're not just hearing complaints, you're hearing identity. Cracked open, unfiltered, uncertain. It's the late 1980s. You walk through Moscow and feel like the wallpaper is peeling off the empire. Posters fade, statues frown. Even Lenin, that stone sentinel of revolution, starts looking embarrassed. The Soviet Union isn't falling yet, but it's wobbling like a drunk philosopher, too full of ideas, not enough balance. Glasnost unleashes memory. Films about Stalin's terror are screened publicly. Veterans tell stories that don't match the textbooks. Artists once banned, now headline festivals. You watch a play about the purges, where the villain isn't a foreign spy, it's the system. The crowd applauds. No one arrests the director. That's new. But with openness comes chaos. The party loses its monopoly on narrative. You see nationalist rallies in Georgia, strikes in the Baltics, open criticism in Ukraine. Everyone wants something different. Autonomy, recognition, distance, and none of it sounds like unity. You visit Vilnius during a demonstration. People hold candles, sing hymns, wave flags that haven't flown in decades. You ask a student why he's marching. He shrugs and says, "Because we exist." It's a quiet phrase, but it echoes louder than any anthem. Meanwhile, the economy spirals. Gorbachev's reforms were supposed to fix the machine. Instead, they dismantle it faster than expected. Shops are empty, prices unpredictable. The black market becomes just the market. Ration cards return. You trade a bottle of vodka for toilet paper and feel like a revolutionary. The party tries to adapt. In 1988, Gorbachev creates a new Soviet parliament, the Congress of People's Deputies. It's televised, live. You watch as delegates argue, accuse, mock, cry. The audience claps. Not for silence, but for disagreement. This, too, is a revolution. And then, something surreal. The Communist Party loses elections. Not everywhere, but enough. Moscow elects an actual reformist. Leningrad, too. Suddenly, democracy isn't just theoretical. It's happening. Messily, loudly, like someone learning to drive by smashing through a garage wall. But while Gorbachev juggles liberalization at home, he's a darling abroad. He ends the war in Afghanistan after 9 brutal years that cost thousands of lives and shredded the illusion of Soviet invincibility. He meets Reagan, shakes hands, smiles, reduces nukes, ends the Cold War. Historians call him brave or naive, or both. And then, 1989, you're in your kitchen when the radio announces it. The Berlin Wall is falling. Falling. Not being dismantled with ceremony, not voted away, just torn down by ordinary people with hammers, with joy, with disbelief. East Germans flood into the West. Champagne is uncorked in the streets. A border that symbolized a world becomes dust and television static. In Prague, the Velvet Revolution sweeps through. In Bulgaria, leaders resign. In Romania, it's bloodier. Ceausescu is executed by firing squad. You watch these events unfold with a mixture of awe and unease, because while the world cheers, you feel the ground shifting beneath your own feet. At home, criticism of Gorbachev grows. The right thinks he's dismantling too much. The left thinks he's too slow. And somewhere in the middle rises a new figure, Boris Yeltsin. Loud, bold, populist. He resigns from the Communist Party in a televised act of defiance. People cheer like it's rock and roll. You walk past a newsstand. Gorbachev is on the cover of Time again. But in the street, people mutter his name with fatigue. The reforms freed speech, but they didn't feed families. And bread, it turns out, matters more than idealism. That year, the Soviet republics begin declaring sovereignty. Not full independence yet, but close. Estonia leads. Latvia follows. Then Lithuania. The dominoes are ideological, but they fall with legal precision. Moscow protests, sends warnings, but its grip is already slipping. In 1990, Gorbachev becomes the president of the USSR, a new title for a system unraveling. He still believes in a reformed union. He still talks of common European homes, but fewer people are listening, not because he's wrong, but because they're done waiting. And through it all, the streets hum, with debate, with music, with noise. The silence of the past has been shattered, and you, once afraid to speak above a whisper, now sit in a cafe discussing politics without looking over your shoulder. It's exhilarating, it's exhausting, and it feels like something huge is coming, something irreversible. But no one, not even Gorbachev, knows what. You wake to a summer heat that feels too still, like the world is holding its breath. It's August 1991. Moscow is tense. Not war-torn, not yet. But something in the air tastes metallic, like the pause before a thunderclap or a coup. You switch on the television. Instead of regular programming, there's a solemn announcement. Gorbachev is ill. unable to perform his duties. A state committee on the state of emergency is taking over. Tanks roll into Red Square. Hardliners, the old guard, those who never forgave Glasnost for letting the ghosts out, have staged a coup. But there's a problem. It's 1991, not 1953. People don't scare as easily. The fear is still there, yes, but so is memory. The kind that remembers protest songs and banned books and televised debates. And most crucially, so is Boris Yeltsin. You're outside the Russian Parliament building, the White House, where Yeltsin climbs onto a tank. His voice crackles through a megaphone, defiant, clear. He calls the coup illegal. He urges resistance. And shockingly, people listen. Thousands flood the streets. No one expected this. Not the coup plotters, not even Yeltsin, probably. You watch teenagers link arms to block tanks. Babushas pass out tea to protesters. Soldiers hesitate. Some switch sides. Others weep. The coup begins to collapse under its own weight. Inept. Disorganized. Too late for a country already halfway out the door. 3 days later, it's over. The plotters arrested. Gorbachev returns to Moscow, blinking into cameras, diminished. Technically he's still president, but the world has changed while he was locked away. Yeltsin, not Gorbachev, is now the man of the hour. The Russian flag, not the Soviet, is raised over the Kremlin. It's not subtle. It's symbolic decapitation. Then, like dominoes, finally losing patience, the republics go. Ukraine declares independence. Then Belarus. Then Central Asia, the Caucasus, the Baltics, all unspooling the threads of empire that had held since Lenin. You visit Vilnius and see the Soviet red banner pulled down like old curtains. In Tbilisi, children draw the Georgian flag with crayons and stick it to lampposts. The past isn't rewritten, it's rejected. Gorbachev tries to hold on. Proposes a new union, something looser, federal. Too late, the center has no gravity left. Even allies look past him. In December, a strange scene. The leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus meet in a forest lodge. They sign a document declaring the USSR ceased to exist. That's it. No war, no riots, just paperwork and exhaustion. The Soviet Union isn't toppled, it retires, quietly, anticlimactically. You sit in your apartment, staring at a television screen where the red Soviet flag over the Kremlin is lowered for the last time, replaced by the tricolour of the Russian Federation. The moment is unscripted, awkward, almost boring. No anthem, no cheers, just wind. After 74 years, the USSR is gone. Historians still argue why. Was it the economic stagnation, the overreach, the failed war in Afghanistan, the weight of lies, the rise of nationalism, the corruption? All of it, probably. Or maybe empires just rot from within when no one believes in them anymore. You step outside, the air smells the same, the buildings are unchanged, but everything feels different. People are dazed, blinking at the new reality. Some weep, some laugh, most just go grocery shopping. You see a man burning his party card. Another kisses it before tossing it into a box. A child asks what Soviet means. No one answers. The state stores begin rebranding. Old statues get covered with plastic sheeting. Lenin still stands in many squares, but fewer people salute. There's talk of democracy, of capitalism, of freedom, but no map, no plan, just an open field where something used to stand. And in that emptiness, hope rushes in, wild, naive, and unprepared. You sleep that night, in a new country, one not yet fully born. You still use rubles, still speak Russian, still wake to news, read by familiar anchors. But the illusion is gone, the spell broken, and the future unwritten. But as you drift into sleep, you hear something you haven't heard in decades, the silence of a world without orders, without fear, without choreography. It's terrifying, it's exhilarating, and it's just beginning. You wake up in but it feels less like the beginning of a new chapter and more like stumbling out of a dream. One of those long, feverish dreams where the faces blur, the buildings shift, and suddenly you're barefoot in the snow, asking where your country went. Because there is no Soviet Union now, just Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan and a dozen other republics that were once neatly coloured red on maps. What remains is a memory, too recent to be history, too heavy to forget. You try to withdraw money. The rubble is molting in real time. Yesterday's savings barely buy bread. Inflation doesn't creep. It gallops. You watch an old woman calculate how many kopecks she can trade for aspirin, and the answer is none. But she buys vodka. You don't blame her. The economy is a roller coaster without a track. Gorbachev's reforms had cracked the door, but now Yeltsin swings it wide open. Shock therapy, they call it. Privatization, liberalization, globalization, all the tumsations that economists love and citizens learn to fear. State-owned factories are sold for pennies to the ambitious, the connected, the ruthless. A new class emerges, the oligarchs. You meet one at a hotel bar, sipping imported whiskey and joking about the wild 90s, while bodyguards scan the exits. He used to repair tractors. Now he owns half of Siberia's aluminum. It took 3 months, 2 handshakes, and 1 suspiciously timed auction. Capitalism, it seems, is a contact sport. Meanwhile, average Russians sell belongings on the street, wedding rings, medals, fur coats. You walk past entire sidewalk economies built from desperation. Barter returns as national policy. Got eggs, trade them for shoes. And yet there's freedom. Raw, messy, chaotic freedom. Newspapers write what they want. Radio hosts rant. Satirists sharpen knives they'd long hidden. You laugh at a puppet show mocking the president. Then remember, you're allowed to laugh now. No knock at the door. No midnight train to the east. But with freedom comes confusion. The Communist Party is banned, briefly, then allowed again. Monuments come down or get graffitied. History textbooks are rewritten faster than they can be printed. One chapter ends with glory to the workers. The next starts with freedom is consumption. You attend a university lecture where the professor explains that Lenin was a genius, a monster, a poet, a pragmatist, a ghost. No one knows which version to believe, so students believe all of them, or none. The youth are unmoored. Some embrace the West, flocking to McDonald's, Levi's, MTV. Others feel betrayed, longing for a time when things made sense, even if that sense came wrapped in fear. Nostalgia creeps in like winter fog, quiet, inevitable. In the countryside, things are worse. Collective farms collapse. Subsidies vanish. Tractors rust in the fields. You visit a village where the only business still running is the cemetery. A babushka tells you, "We waited 70 years for this." Then she invites you in for tea, because hospitality still outlives ideology. In Moscow, Yeltsin becomes erratic, drunk on stage, confused during speeches. He promises reform, unity, growth. The ruble plunges. Parliament rebels. In 1993, he orders tanks to shell the very building where he once stood on a turret for democracy. You watch the footage and feel the twist in your stomach. Democracy shoots now. The West cheers cautiously. The Cold War is over, they say. Capitalism won. But in the neighborhoods of Volgograd, Murmansk, Omsk, no one feels like a winner. People eat less meat, wear older coats, live shorter lives. The life expectancy for men drops like a bad joke no one laughs at. And yet there are glimmers. A new generation grows up without indoctrination. They speak freely, mock freely, dream freely. You meet teenagers forming garage bands, painting graffiti, learning English not from school books, but from pirated VHS tapes. They don't remember the Soviet anthem. They hum Nirvana instead. The Orthodox Church returns, like a distant uncle suddenly remembered. Churches are restored, services held. Faith creeps back into the national mood. Not always out of belief, but out of need, for meaning, for rhythm, for something older than this whirlwind of change. You sleep in a tiny flat where the electricity flickers and the neighbour's dog barks every time someone opens a newspaper. Outside, the streetlights buzz with the low hum of transition. The Soviet Union is gone, but its echo lingers in language, in memory, in the way people queue, even when they don't need to. And as you close your eyes, you wonder, is this freedom, or just another costume the empire wears? By the mid-1990s, you realize the empire didn't collapse with a bang. It crumbled with a shrug. The Soviet past is still everywhere, but now it's repackaged, half forgotten, or sold as novelty. There's Lenin, reduced to fridge magnets, the KGB, now FSB, with rebranded business cards, the Red Army chorus performing on variety shows. Irony is currency. Memory is marketing. You walk past a grocery store window displaying pickled cucumbers beside copies of the Communist Manifesto. Outside, a man sells old Soviet medals, not for honor, but for bread. A woman tells you, we traded ideology for soap operas. She's not even mad about it, just tired. And yet there's something electric in the air. Moscow starts glowing with neon. Cafes appear. Billboards tower. 1,000 tiny signs scream, look, we're modern now. But it's more cosplay than transformation. The buildings get taller. The infrastructure sinks deeper into neglect. You meet a teacher who now drives a taxi, a doctor who sells imported socks, a physicist who copies CDs in his garage. Everyone adapts, because everyone must. No one's coming to fix this. Oligarchs, meanwhile, rise like volcanic gods from the smouldering crater. They snatch up factories, oil fields, newspapers. Suddenly, there are Russian billionaires, barely 30, absurdly rich, unfathomably bold. They throw parties on yachts the size of Soviet destroyers. They sponsor football clubs. They casually influence parliament. You see one ride by in a bulletproof BMW, windows tinted like truth. You wonder if he remembers standing in a ration line. He probably does. That's the terrifying part. Politics grows stranger. Yeltsin's approval ratings plummet below freezing. Inflation spikes. Pensions vanish. A Chechen war breaks out. The first one, bloody, confusing, televised. It's sold as a counter-terrorism operation. It looks more like a fever dream. You watch villages burn on state TV, then see a toothpaste commercial seconds later. Cognitive dissonance becomes national policy. Then 1996 presidential elections. Everyone braces. Communist nostalgia is back. Gennady Zyuganov leads in the polls. He promises order, bread, purpose. Yeltsin, bloated and faltering, campaigns like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. But behind the scenes, the oligarchs step in. Media is twisted. Narratives are sculpted. Yeltsin wins, barely. Some say democracy prevailed. Others say it was puppeteered to survive itself. You sit in a kitchen party where no one knows what's real anymore. Someone sips cheap vodka and says, truth has too many channels now. They change the subject to weather. And yet, amid the chaos, culture blooms. Russian cinema wakes up again, raw, unfiltered. Literature dives into the trauma of transition. You read novels that hurt more than history books. Pain, it seems, is good for art, always has been. A new middle class starts forming, haltingly. You visit a mall that used to be a factory. Kids with gelled hair and knockoff Game Boys loiter near fountains. The music is Western. The attitude is neither East nor West, just somewhere floating in between. Religion surges back. Churches are restored, filled with gold leaf and incense. Priests, once hiding in the shadows, now appear on television. Some see hope, others see control. Either way, it's filling the vacuum ideology left behind. And so is nostalgia. By the late 90s, you feel it growing. Statues get cleaned. Soviet imagery starts reappearing, not as oppression, but as heritage. Songs from the 70s play on the radio. There's a commercial using cosmonauts to sell yogurt. The past isn't gone, it's rebranded. Yeltsin, aged beyond his years, lurches toward the millennium like a man holding on to his last cigarette in a rainstorm. He's mocked, pitied, still somehow revered for being the man who opened the door, even if he forgot to build the stairs. December 31st. He resigns. Unexpectedly, announces it live on TV. Says he's tired. Says Russia needs a new face for a new era. Then he names his successor. You hear the name Vladimir Putin. Barely known. Ex-KGB. Calm, sharp, disciplined. Formerly in charge of security. You blink, everyone blinks. It's the quiet ones, always, who move fastest. He promises order, stability, a strong state, no chaos, no revolutions. You listen, skeptical, but curious. After all, the century is ending. Maybe something else is too. That night, you fall asleep watching fireworks light the sky over the Kremlin. The year 2000 arrives. The Soviet Union is a memory now, aching, absurd, astonishing, and whatever comes next, well, it's no longer a sequel. It's something else, entirely. You wake on the first day of the new millennium to a Russia that is technically not Soviet, but somehow still tastes like it. The buildings are the same, the languages are the same, the food, the weather, the national awkwardness, with optimism, same. But the mood is shifting. Vladimir Putin doesn't enter with fanfare. He arrives with calm menace, like a surgeon, with steady hands and no bedside manner. His first few months are soft-spoken, administrative. You watch him speak on TV and think, this man has no jokes, not a single one, and that's the point. He doesn't inspire, he restores. His first act, pardon Yeltsin, signal continuity, comfort the elites. Then, swiftly, he begins consolidating. The free-for-all of the 90s, its dizzying press, chaotic elections, rogue provinces, starts to feel like an experiment that exhausted everyone. Putin walks in like a janitor with a vision. The Second Chechen War intensifies. Brutal, secretive, total. The apartment bombings in Moscow in 1999, mysterious, still debated, set the stage. Terrorism becomes the buzzword. Security becomes the brand. You hear whispers, the FSB is back, but they never really left. Old habits, new suits. Television gets streamlined. Oligarchs like Berezovsky and Jasinski, once kingmakers, are either exiled or tamed. Media outlets lose their edges, then their teeth. Elections happen, yes, but the outcomes feel preordained. The opposition becomes a ritual, a polite one. And yet, the economy recovers. Oil prices soar. The ruble stabilizes. Salaries are paid on time. Streets get cleaned. Moscow starts looking like a European capital, with sushi bars, designer malls, and more traffic than sense. You visit an old woman who tells you, finally someone's in charge. You don't argue. Stability, after a decade of madness, feels like a warm bath, even if the water hides something sharp at the bottom. Culturally, a new narrative forms. The Soviet era isn't condemned, it's rehabilitated, carefully. Stalin isn't praised, but he's understood. Victory in World War II becomes the sacred myth again. You attend a parade where teenage boys march in Red Army uniforms, and no one finds it odd. Nostalgia gets state-sponsored. Museums reframe the past. The word greatness returns. Tentative, then bold. You see it everywhere. Great Russia, strong Russia, Russia rising. It's nationalism, yes, but with a softer coat. Meanwhile, the West applauds Putin's early years. He's a modernizer, they say, a pragmatist. You watch him speak in German to the Bundestag. He smiles. He's smooth. He says the word partnership. And for a moment, the Cold War really does feel over. But cracks appear. In 2004, Ukraine's Orange Revolution explodes. A pro-Western wave. Putin watches with cold eyes. He sees not democracy, but betrayal. The idea that a former Soviet republic could slip away, choose another orbit, it's intolerable. That same year, in Russia, the school siege in Beslan leaves over 300 dead, many of them children. The images are seared into national memory. The state tightens further. Governors are no longer elected. Power is recentralized, and dissent becomes a red flag again. By the late 2000s, Putin's popularity is still high, sky high. The West questions it. Russians shrug. After all, pensions are paid, groceries are stocked, crime is down, the trains run, even if they run in circles. You meet young people who adore him, and others who hate him, but all speak his name like a fact, not a choice. Then, in 2008, the term limits hit. He steps aside. Technically, Dmitry Medvedev becomes president. Putin becomes prime minister. But no one's fooled. It's a political matryoshka doll. The outer shell might change, but the face inside stays the same. And so the Soviet story doesn't end with a rupture. It lingers in policies, in rituals, in how people interpret their own suffering. You hear a joke told by a cab driver. Under communism, we pretended to work. Now we pretend to choose. He laughs. You do too. But it doesn't feel like a joke. It feels like a diagnosis. You walk past a Lenin statue that hasn't been touched in years, covered in dust, birds nesting in his beard. No one topples him anymore. They just ignore him. And yet, in some towns, his busts are freshly painted. Red flags still wave on Victory Day. Old men still march with medals. Because memory here doesn't fade, it folds into poems, into scars, into bedtime stories for a new generation that never saw breadlines, but knows the anthem by heart. You sleep that night in a city reborn, but haunted, a place where Wi-Fi flows faster than water, but censorship grows smarter than your VPN, a place where the Soviet Union is gone, but not quite dead. And in your dream a question echoes. If an empire collapses, but its ghost runs the government, did it ever truly fall? You wake to the soft static of a television that never quite turns off. It's 2012, and Vladimir Putin is president again. Officially, this time, not just spiritually. The reset is complete. The tandem rule was a pause, not a shift. The man who once offered stability now offers something harder to define, continuity laced with consequence. You attend the inauguration. Well, you watch it on TV, alongside millions. The streets of Moscow are eerily empty. Protesters are kept at a distance. Applause is choreographed. It's democracy in costume, tailored, polished, camera-ready, and the costume fits a little too well. That same year, protests erupt. The Bolotnaya Square demonstrations are loud, colourful, angry, middle-class Muscovites demanding fair elections, dignity, a real voice. For a moment, it feels like Glasnost again, like the thaw might return, but it doesn't. The police crack down. Leaders are jailed. State media reframes the narrative. Protesters become agents of chaos, foreign-funded, unpatriotic, and with that, a new chapter begins. Not of silence, but of noise controlled from the top. The language changes. Words like sovereignty and traditional values become talismans. The West is no longer partner, but rival. NATO isn't distant, it's threatening. History is rewritten not to explore the past, but to justify the present. You visit a museum exhibit about Stalin. It doesn't praise him, exactly, but it does say things like necessary sacrifices and effective leadership. You stand beside a teenager who takes a selfie with the wax figure. He hashtags it, strong leader. And slowly you see the Soviet ghost get repackaged, not as villain, but as vintage. The military gets more funding. The church gets more airtime. The textbooks change. A new generation learns that the USSR might have been harsh, but it was proud, respected, feared. You hear teachers say things like, "Back then, we didn't kneel." They don't mean literally. Then 2014, you watch Crimea fall, not in war, but in rhetoric. A referendum, historical correction, reunification. Russian troops, those polite green men, appear without insignia, like shadows given form. The world protests. Russia shrugs. Putin's approval soars. National pride explodes. You see flags everywhere. The Soviet anthem's melody, still Russia's official tune, plays louder, longer. Television plays montages of past glory, cosmonauts, tanks, hockey wins, and always, always Red Square. At home, economic sanctions bite. The ruble drops. Prices rise. But the narrative is airtight. This is resistance, not pain. You see a bakery with a sign reading, "No foreign flour, only Russian soul." It's nonsense, but it sells out daily. Censorship evolves. It's not about silencing, it's about drowning. 100 narratives at once, all clashing, all confusing. You try to track what's real, and by the time you've finished, the goalposts have moved. Truth isn't denied, it's blurred. The internet becomes a battleground. Bloggers, journalists, teenagers on TikTok, some dissent, some mock, but all feel the eyes watching. You hear about the foreign agent law, about blocked websites, about a comedian questioned for a tweet from two. The message is clear: speak, yes, but remember who's listening. And yet, life goes on. Cities glow. Infrastructure improves. Some schools get new funding. The elderly receive state-funded trips to patriotic films. The middle class, though thinner, adapts. Everyone adjusts expectations, like a thermostat in winter, just enough to keep from freezing. And then there's the memory. Always the memory. You go to a parade on Victory Day. It's grand, precise, thunderous. Tanks roll, jets scream overhead, veterans cry, children wave flags. You feel pride, sorrow, ambivalence, all at once. Because the great patriotic war isn't just history, it's emotional infrastructure. The Soviet flag appears again, not on government buildings, but in hearts. You hear people say, "We had order back then, we had respect, we weren't ashamed, never mind the fear, never mind the bread lines, nostalgia is a fog, it softens everything." And maybe that's the final irony. The Soviet Union collapsed from within, but its ghost survived by shape-shifting. Not into gulags or rigid doctrine, but into feelings, pride, loss, exceptionalism, the belief that Russia is not just a nation, but an idea too large to fail. You sleep that night under a sky lit with artificial stars, from a drone show sponsored by the Ministry of Culture. A robotic voice reads poetry by Mayakovsky. No one claps, but everyone watches. And just before you close your eyes, you think, the USSR didn't die. It turned into a dream someone keeps trying to wake from. And maybe you're still in it. By the 2020s, waking up in Russia means waking up to layers, like peeling wallpaper in an old apartment. Each year exposes a different face of the past. Tsarist dreams, Soviet ghosts, capitalist experiments, all stacked like forgotten chapters, in a very strange, very thick novel that insists on being reread. The Soviet Union no longer exists, yes, but its legacy? Oh, it's everywhere. Not in the factories, many of which have been turned into lofts or left to rust, but in the rhythm of things, the habit of suspicion, the worship of strength, the strange romance with sacrifice. You ride the metro in Moscow and notice how silent it still is. People don't smile. They calculate, not necessarily danger, just uncertainty, because the rules are always changing, but the stakes remain the same. Survival first, truth later. The statues are still standing, not all of them, but enough. Lenin gazes, across squares with an air of quiet endurance. No one's burning his effigy. No one's bowing either. He's just there, like a crack in the pavement, too old to fix. You see school children reciting patriotic poetry, waving Russian flags stitched with echoes. Their grandparents cry with pride, not because they believe all of it, but because it reminds them of when things had a script. Meanwhile, state media grows louder, sharper. The West is always encroaching. Enemies everywhere, NATO at the gates, internal traitors, foreign agents. The language is less Marx, more Orwell. A new generation doesn't remember the USSR, but they inherit its mythos like a family heirloom nobody asked for. They wear Adidas like sacred armor. They listen to Western pop while joking about gulags. They meme Stalin. Irony is their only protection. Then in 2022, the story turns sharp again. War. Not in metaphor, not in frozen conflicts, but real war. Ukraine, full-scale invasion, broadcast live, minute by minute, pixel by pixel. You watch cities burn, Kyiv under attack, Mariupol surrounded, Bucha scarred. You thought you'd seen the last of tanks in Europe rolling through civilian streets, but history has its ways of doubling back when you stop paying attention. And the justification, a twisted echo, denazification, protection, historical unity, old words in new mouths. The language of 1945 spoken in 2022, as if decades of pain, independence and sovereignty had been a misunderstanding. Protests erupt, some small, some brave, all met with batons, fines, exile. Thousands leave the country. You hear of journalists packing bags at midnight, artists deleting entire portfolios, teenagers arrested for signs made of cardboard and hope. And yet, the Kremlin's grip tightens. Drafts are announced. Young men flee to Georgia, to Kazakhstan, to anywhere that doesn't wear epaulets. You see videos of mothers crying at train stations, sending sons away with sandwiches and warnings. The economy strains. Sanctions mount. Global isolation returns, not as Cold War frost, but as a slow bureaucratic suffocation. Flights vanish. Imports halt. McDonald's closes. Again, this time for real. You hear a joke. We waited 30 years for freedom, and it turned out freedom only had a lease. Laughter is dry now, not bitter, just tired. In the midst of it all, the past becomes a weapon. TV shows glorify the Soviet military. Textbooks erase awkward paragraphs. Stalin's face appears on mugs, not ironically. You visit a bookstore and see a children's coloring book about heroes of the motherland. Page 1, Yuri Gagarin. Page 2, a missile. People survive. They always do. You see new cafes, new weddings, new music, everything reshaped to fit the narrowing space allowed. The USSR may be gone, but its operating system still runs in the background, booting up whenever the present feels too unpredictable. And you? You drift through it, like a museum where the exhibits change names but not positions. Because by now, the Soviet Union isn't a place. It's an atmosphere, a pressure, a memory that keeps revising itself. And even when you want to let go, it's hard to tell where it ends, and you begin. That night you fall asleep to the distant sound of a patriotic concert on state TV. Military choirs, marching children, old war footage, set to triumphant strings. And just before you close your eyes, you remember a line whispered decades ago. We pretend to work, they pretend to pay. But now, you pretend to forget, and they pretend it never ended. So here you are drifting into the 2020s where the Soviet Union officially belongs to museums, but unofficially haunts everything from border disputes to supermarket layouts. It's been over 3 decades since that flag came down from the Kremlin, but some things refuse to stay folded. You walk past a Victory Day rehearsal in Moscow. Teens in replica uniforms march to songs written before their parents were born. A little girl clutches a balloon shaped like a T-34 tank. The past isn't being remembered, it's being reenacted, lovingly, forcefully, with snacks. Meanwhile, the archives continue to open. Slowly, selectively, sometimes not at all. Historians beg for facts. Officials offer mythology. You read a newspaper column celebrating Soviet discipline, right beside a feature on food shortages in 1986. No one notices the irony, or maybe they just pretend not to. You meet young people who feel cheated by history, taught one thing, shown another, then told to believe both. One calls it patriotic schizophrenia. He's half joking, but only half. And then there are the older generations, those who lived through it all. Their stories are fading now, muttered between coughs in cramped kitchens, or whispered at gravestones. They remember the parades, sure, but also the whispers, the cues, the quiet terror of saying too much in stairwells. Their memory is not nostalgia, it's ache. The strange thing is, no one really wants the USSR back. Not exactly. Not the purges, not the 5-year plans, not the bread cards, but parts of it, the pride, the scale, the illusion of coherence. Those are harder to let go of. You visit a memorial to Stalin's victims in a provincial town. Flowers at the base, a plaque etched with too many names. A babushka passes by and mutters, "But at least we had order." You want to argue. You don't, because in her lifetime every kind of order has crumbled. Let her have this one. Economically, the legacy lingers. Monopolies, corruption, paranoia disguised as policy. In every ministry office, there's still a desk drawer with a form no one understands but everyone fills out, just in case. Culturally, even more so, the language of the USSR, its cliches, its triumphs, its enemies has been repurposed, painted over, photoshopped into memes or state speeches. You see Stalin on TikTok. You hear Brezhnev jokes repurposed for new presidents. You even hear people say at least the USSR had dignity while streaming Western series on VPNs. And abroad, the shadow spreads too. Former republics once tethered to Moscow now brace against its reach. Estonia militarizes, Kazakhstan hedges bets, Ukraine bleeds, because the fall of the Soviet Union wasn't just an end. It was a fracture that keeps cracking. You talk to a boy in Georgia who tells you he doesn't fear Russia. "We've been invaded before," he shrugs. "They always come. They always leave." His grandmother gives him a look. "They don't always leave," she whispers. And through it all, the question grows louder. Did the Soviet Union really fall, or did it just shift forms? You consider how it shaped lives, not just with gulags and speeches, but with toothpaste brands, architectural norms, social contracts, how it redefined time, 5-year plans, eternal struggles, forever peace, and now, without it, time feels jagged, unscripted, exhausting. So you return to that phrase, the rise and fall. Yes, the Soviet Union rose, against odds, with fury, built with bones and blueprints and bombast. It rose like a storm. And yes, it fell, not with fire, but fatigue, not with rebellion, but resignation. But the fall wasn't a drop. It was a drift, a slow motion unraveling, still in progress. You lie in bed, watching shadows play across your ceiling, like a film reel you've seen 1,000 times. A cosmonaut waves, a tank rumbles, a woman cries in a breadline, a child salutes a flag that no longer flies. This isn't a lecture. It's a second-person immersive journey through an empire built on ice and iron, imagination and fear. You've walked beside rebels, leaders, mothers, soldiers, dreamers. You've marched through revolutions, coups, songs, and silences. So close your eyes. Let the hum of an old projector return and drift into sleep, wrapped not in ideology, but in memory. Because some ghosts aren't gone. They're just waiting for the lights to dim.